So today I'm going to go through 10 things that I've learned training for my first marathon. Hopefully this will help you a little bit if you are currently training for your first marathon. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't want the video to be too long, but I'm going to quickly go through 10 things that I've learned. If you want any more information on anything, just leave a comment down below. And in no particular order, let's get started. So when you first start increasing your distance during marathon training, you are going to burn more calories. And I found that I was getting so hungry all the time and I wasn't actually eating any more calories during my marathon training. I was just eating like I would normally, but increasing my distance made me really hungry all the time. And I did actually lose weight at the start. But I feel like now I've adjusted kind of my calorie in and out. So I'm not kind of losing weight and not feeling as hungry all the time. So that's one thing that I learned, is that if you don't eat enough calories during marathon training, you are going to be very hungry and even lose weight. The next thing is that you need to test out your gear before race day. This is the best time to be testing out kind of anything new that you buy, including clothes, sports bras, shoes, socks, everything. That's how you kind of determine if you're having any chafing or if anything's going to be uncomfortable, which you don't want on race day. So this is the best time to kind of test your gear out and make sure everything's going to be perfect and nothing's going to cause any issues on race day. The next thing I learned is that marathon training is very tiring. I found that just increasing distance and running more often in a week just made me really tired. I ended up having naps at lunchtime when I work from home, and sometimes early evenings or on the weekends when I'm not out and about doing stuff. I would just end up feeling really tired and having a lot of naps. It does get better over time, but when you first start marathon training, you are going to feel very tired, and I think that's just very normal, and yeah, it will get better. The next thing I learned is something that I'm still working on and kind of still struggling at the moment, but you will need to increase your protein intake. It is definitely harder for someone who doesn't eat meat like myself. But increasing protein intake during marathon training is very important to avoid exhaustion, which I've been feeling a lot in general, but it's even more important when you're marathon training. Just make sure you're eating enough protein to help your muscle recover, and also as you get older you're not losing kind of the muscle mass. It's just to keep you strong and fit to go through all that training and actually race on marathon day. The other thing I learned the hard way was to allow yourself longer to train for a marathon than you might think. I know there are a lot of kind of guides and advice that say about 12 weeks before a marathon that you should start training, but this depends on if you are already a runner and how much you've been running before. I think a 12-week plan is a good kind of guide, but for me, even though I was running before and I've been training for half marathons before my first marathon training started, I felt like the 12 weeks wasn't quite enough during training, and I ended up getting injured. And also I ended up picking, I didn't mean to, but I ended up picking a training plan that was a little bit too aggressive. So I was doing really long runs kind of week after week after week, and my body just wasn't used to it and I got injured. So what I've learned is, rather than doing 12 weeks, a 12-week training plan, I actually do more like a 16-week training plan, unless I'm already training for half marathons and doing kind of quite long distances beforehand. So for me, I feel like the thing that I learned is to allow yourself more time than you think you might need, just to avoid injuries and allow time for your body to rest and recover as well. And sometimes, like I say, it could be injuries, it could be illness, just getting a cold or anything like that could kind of slow down your training. So giving yourself more time is always a good idea, and that's what I do now for marathon training. Another thing that I learned during marathon training is stay hydrated. I've always been quite good with hydration, I think, but during marathon training, especially in the summer, I do feel like I'm dehydrated a little bit more, and sometimes I end up getting kind of cramps on my calf a little bit, or it feels very tight around my calves. And I do feel like I need to drink a little bit more, but it's not just drinking water to replenish fluid in your body that you lose, it's also replenishing sodium. I take a lot of electrolyte when I run. I mean, even if I'm not running in the summer, I still have electrolyte, and just replenishing the sodium as I run and sweat is very important. So that's something that I kind of learned over the years of running in general, but even more so it's important for marathon training. The next thing is I learned that there are good runs and bad runs, definitely. There are some runs that I come home feeling I've done really well, and I've managed to hit those speeds during my speed sessions, and they feel really good, and I felt like I still had energy at the end of a run. Some days I dread to go out for a run. I'm already trying to find excuses to not go out for a run because I don't feel like it. Either I'm tired or I'm busy or I just don't feel like going out for a run. And even more so when it's just been really hot outside, or the other end, which is just torrential rain and it's wet and windy. There's so many reasons why sometimes I just don't want to go for a run. And then those runs sometimes end up being quite bad. I would go out for a run, force myself to go out the house, and then those runs just feel really bad and I didn't do very well, and I end up walking more than I wanted to run, and sometimes I have to cut the runs short because I just haven't got any energy. So I've learned that there are definitely good runs and bad runs, so don't be too hard on yourself, even though I try to tell myself that. Not every run's going to be perfect, and that's okay. Just getting yourself out is good enough. And sometimes if you really just need to take that day off and not go for a run, that's okay too. That's something that I'm still kind of learning, and just not be too hard on myself. So yeah, they're going to be good runs as well as bad runs. Another thing that's very important is a lot of people do say it's consistency, and that is definitely true. I feel like the more regularly I run and more consistently doing 3 days a run every week, that slowly I'm feeling kind of just fitter in myself, and I feel like I can run a little bit faster. And those initially really hard speed sessions do feel a little bit more manageable over time, and I do feel like my pace is getting quicker, and I can run for longer and it's just a little bit easier. I feel like sometimes I run a bit faster, but my heart rate is actually lower. So all of that is kind of just building endurance. So being consistent is actually very important during running and marathon training. When I was injured during my first marathon training, I feel like cross training was very important. I feel like being able to go out for a walk instead of a run, or if you can go for a swim or a cycle or anything like that, is actually better than just not doing anything at all. I feel like it's a good idea to incorporate cross training during marathon training. I try to go on an indoor bike every now and again, but I don't really enjoy being on a bike, and I do feel like sometimes my knee hurts a bit more when I'm cycling. But instead I kind of do go out for walks a bit more than I would go for a cycle or bike ride on an indoor bike. So for me, my kind of cross training would be going for a walk, and I try to do that anyway because I feel like it's very beneficial for running and just general being on my feet, especially when I was training for my 100k, which I'm going to do again next year. So a lot of walking is really helpful as part of cross training. But if you prefer, like I said, you can do cycling or swimming or any kind of other form of cardio that might be good to kind of give your legs and feet a bit of a break from running. The next thing is strength training, which I found has been so important during marathon training. I think one of the reasons I got injured during my first marathon training is because I wasn't doing strength training. I did when I first started running kind of a couple of years ago, but then I kind of felt like I haven't had enough time to do it, and I kind of slowly just stopped strength training, which was a big mistake during marathon training because I think that's when I got injured. And when I saw a physiotherapist, they kind of told me that I've got kind of a lot of imbalances, and then I think I had problems with my knees because my quads were weak, and then just all the muscles around my legs and my hips weren't strong enough to kind of go through all that sort of distance every week. So I ended up joining the gym, and I've been going for over a year now, and I feel like that really helped with my next marathon that I did. I've only done 2 marathons so far, but just adding strength training made a huge difference because the first time I was injured, the second time I was training I wasn't, and it went really well my second marathon. So strength training is a must. Let me know if there's anything that you've learned during your running journey or any sort of exercise that you do. It would be very interesting to see if there's anything that I might have missed and then that you actually experienced during your running journey. As well as strength training, I feel like conditioning your body is quite important as well. I have a massage gun that I use on a lot of my legs after a long run, or sometimes when I've been doing like a trail run or been running hills. My quads do really ache after that, so I feel like a massage gun is really, really helpful in kind of loosening the muscles. If you can foam roll, that would be very good as well. And in general, stretching is really good. My physiotherapist suggested I do some stretches to kind of help my hips and my knees because I've had problems before, and I feel like it really does help. So if you do have time to do that, then it's really good towards your marathon training. The other thing I learned is check the weather before you head out the door. I know it's not always easy in the UK to kind of predict the weather because it's constantly changing. So many runs that I've done, especially long runs, I've had 4 seasons within 2 or 3 hours that I've been running. So sometimes I'll start off, it'll be raining, so I'll be wearing a rain jacket, and then the sun will come out and it'll be too hot, and then it'll be really windy, and then it just cycles through, and then it'll be all 4 seasons kind of in one run. So it's quite hard, but I feel like just knowing what sort of temperature it's going to be like would make a very big difference. And if I know there's a chance of rain, I will kind of be a bit more prepared. I might bring a waterproof layer depending on how hot it is outside or how cold. And for me, because I wear contact lenses, if it's going to rain, I definitely would bring a visor to kind of cover my eyes so I don't get water in my eyes because of my contact lenses. And obviously, if it's going to be sunny or potentially be sunny, I'll bring sunglasses because just squinting the whole time during a run is just not pleasant. So yeah, make sure you check the weather before you head out the door. Another thing that I kind of leads on to one of the points I made before is to increase your distance and intensity gradually. One of the reasons I got injured is, again, because I increased the distance too much too soon. So at one point I was doing kind of 30k, 32k, 34k week after week. So within 3 weeks, my long runs would add up to over 60 kilometers. And then that doesn't include the little runs in between during the week. So I feel like it's very important to increase gradually. And I know a lot of people go by the 10% rule each week. So I think that's a good way to kind of follow that sort of distance in terms of increasing them. That just helps your body slowly adapt to increasing the distance and you won't get injured, hopefully. So that's one thing that I've learned very early on. The next thing I learned is also something that I mentioned in one of my previous videos. Marathon training takes up a lot of time. I knew it was going to take up more time than I kind of expected in a way. But it turns out that you actually need to dedicate a lot more time than you think. So for a long run, for example, if we're going to go out for a 3 or 4 hour run, I'll have to get up 2 hours before my run starts to eat breakfast, because if I don't leave 2 hours before I start running, I get a stitch. So that time gets added to the actual run. And also if I'm going to do a long run, I also make sure I kind of eat the appropriate food the night before. So it all takes into account the time, and it's not just the actual run itself, but all the other things that come with it, and all the thinking and planning and preparation. It all takes up quite a lot of time. And then as your distance increases towards race day, the weekly distances do increase. So even during the week, it would end up being kind of like a 15k long run, or even a 17k long run in the week. And if you're like me, working full time, it's quite hard to kind of squeeze in those long runs when you have to go to work. You either have to get really, really early before work, or then come back and run kind of after work. So yeah, marathon training takes up a lot of time. Another thing I learned is that missing a run isn't the end of the world. Sometimes life happens and you physically cannot fit in a run, and that's okay. Also, you might be ill or something comes up, and in my case would be I've had a really bad night's sleep and I have literally no energy to go out for a long run or any run. Then I kind of miss a run, and that's okay. It's not going to massively affect your training you're not going to suddenly lose all the fitness that you've built up. So I try to remind myself it's okay to miss a run every so often if life happens. The next thing is that marathon training makes you very emotional. I don't know if that's for everyone else as well. I find that since I've been training for marathon, I've become quite emotional in a lot of situations. Sometimes when I just think about how bad a run has gone, then I kind of feel emotional. Sometimes even when a run has been going well, I kind of feel emotional. And I just generally feel like I'm more emotional since training for a marathon and just running loads. And especially when I actually ran my first marathon, if you've seen my video, I was just crying. I just feel like marathon training makes you emotional. Another important thing is during marathon training, don't try to cut out carbs too much. You will need the carbs for energy to do those runs. It's a hard balance, because I've said before that I feel like as I age and I'm getting a bit older, I feel like even though I'm not eating necessarily more, but I feel like I'm slowly just putting on weight and getting a little bit fatter. So there's kind of times where I feel like I want to cut out carbs a bit more, eat less, but that really impacts my training. I feel like I don't have enough energy. and I just feel really sluggish. So I feel like carbs are very important during marathon training, so don't cut out a lot or don't decrease your carb intake. And as your distance increases over time, you need to take in more carbs to kind of fuel for those long runs. The one motivation I had during marathon training was to kind of tell everyone and announce to everyone that I'm training for a marathon. I feel like that way I'm accountable and that I'm going to have to do it because everyone knows about it. I feel like that was one way to kind of keep me motivated and go out for those runs when I didn't want to. So that's one way during marathon training that can just keep you going, because sometimes it can be weeks or months before you actually do your marathon. So I feel like just telling everyone that you're doing it kind of helps with just motivation. If you're running your first marathon, I feel like it's very important to pick one that you feel excited about. My first marathon would have ideally been London Marathon, but I didn't get in. So I picked kind of the second biggest one in the UK. Some people say it's Brighton, that's the second biggest marathon, but I feel like it's Manchester. And I've heard a lot of good things about Manchester, and the crowd's amazing, and they were when I ran my first marathon in Manchester. So pick a race that you feel really passionate about, or one that you've been wanting to run, or one that's kind of your hometown marathon that you know you've been hearing about and you know about for a long time. Just pick one that really excites you so you can look forward to it. Yeah, and really feel excited about running it on race day. And the other thing that kept me going during marathon training is to picture myself crossing the finish line. There's so many times where I've gone out for long runs, and every week that I'm doing these longer and longer runs, eventually it does get a bit boring and repetitive. And I generally run kind of in the same area where I would normally go for a run. So I head out the door and start running. So it does get a little bit mundane and repetitive. But for me, what kept me going is to imagine myself crossing the finish line, like running and not kind of struggling, which I did a bit in the end. But actually just imagining myself crossing the finish line and what it feels like, and that kind of kept me going during marathon training. I feel like every time I don't stop and every time I just keep running and keep turning up for those long runs is what I'm working towards, is to cross the finish line. And that really helped me during marathon training, is to picture yourself crossing the finish line with your arms in the air. So those were the 10 things that I've learned during my first marathon training, and hopefully it was somewhat helpful to you. And like I say, if you are training for your first marathon, then maybe some of these will be kind of prepare you mentally and physically, and kind of just let you know kind of what I've gone through during my first marathon training. Like I say, if there's anything that you kind of learned during your training or your exercise or running journey, let me know in the comments down below. I will see you on my next video. My name is Uni. Thank you so much for watching. See you later. Bye.